Welcome to the Work Podcast, brought to you by Open Assembly. I'm John Windsor, and today I'm with Tim Sanders. Tim is the Vice President of Consumer Insights at Upwork, where he helps businesses implement better ways of working through the adoption of flexible talent solutions. He is a best-selling author, a top-rated speaker, and his research over the last few years has centered around speeding up innovation through wide collaboration. How are you doing today, Tim?
Doing great, John. Great to be with you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I'm super psyched to talk. I mean, you guys, as we talked before the podcast, we've had very similar backgrounds, speaking and doing it on our own and building freelance teams on our own. And it's super cool to see you kind of go in the machine as somebody who's done this stuff as a customer, right, and actually help improve it. I think that's kudos to Upwork for doing that, and really awesome for you, because I think that so many companies get away from that, right? They kind of get further and further away from their customer and say, I think we know better, our strategists, our designers, and we're not really like embracing our customers to build them into our system. And really, really cool to see. But what I want to do is, you shared so much great stuff with me, but could you share a few minutes about like, what's your background? How did you get here? And what really got you excited about joining Upwork?
Well, I'll make it clear early on, I'm kind of an old dude. So when I started out my career, I dropped out of grad school to be the personal attaché for a cranky old brilliant man named Ed Deming, Dr. Edward Deming. And he had just come back from Japan. He was on the Great North America tour. I carried his bags. So John, it wasn't a glorious job, but it was a great experience for me to learn the value of two things: experience and collaboration. And I developed a taste for cutting edge. So when I left the work of Dr. Deming, I was one of the first employees at Southwestern Bell Mobile back in the 80s when we launched cellular phones, which was a great improvement over IMTF, formerly known as trunk phones. I went to work for Mark Cuban in the 90s when he was launching AudioNet, which became broadcast.com. When he sold it to Yahoo, I eventually rose to Yahoo's chief solutions officer, working on critical situations for several years. That's when I started writing books on my spare time, like Love is the Killer app. But in 2005, I started a 15-year career as a strategic consultant, deploying freelance teams of analysts, as well as strategic consultants. And along the way, I met Upwork. I fell in love with Upwork not only as a reservoir for great talent from my own business, but I also fell in love with the model of what they could do for clients from SMB all the way up to enterprise. Shut my business down at the end of 2019, joined Upwork as the VP of Customer Insights. And now I get on the phone every day and I try to cross-pollinate work, whether it's work at Deloitte, a center of work, or whether it's work at a major company like Microsoft, thinking about the future of work.
That's awesome. Great timing on that move.
Yeah. I mean, I dodged a bullet, so to speak, as a person who spent a lot of time on the lecture circuit. That's for sure.
Yeah. I have a buddy who, was doing 80 speeches a year, very, very well before COVID, and hasn't done so well. So it's a really great pivot. And one of the things I love about Upwork, and early on, just being Odesk and Elance and seeing that kind of evolution from so far back. Those of us, like Mike Morris at Topcoder and myself, starting everything in 2000, 1999, it's really, really great to see some of the folks that have done it for so long finally get some traction. It's amazing. So what's the most interesting thing you're working on right now? I mean, you mentioned some things, connecting people, but what day to day, how are you making this revolution really happen?
I'm working on getting in front of strategic priorities versus chasing them. So what I think about a lot is what relevant executives are concerned about, but they're not to the point where it's urgent yet. I almost like to follow Dr. Stephen Covey Sr.'s quadrant 2 way of living. I want to get in there and work on the important but not yet urgent, because it allows us at Upwork from a product or a service standpoint to really figure out that fit, right? As opposed to trying to adapt a product with no time on the clock to do that. Give you a couple of examples. So early on in 2019, when I was still just consulting for Upwork, I was exposed to the work behind the technology fallacy. Jerry Kane on Phillips, MIT Press, made a really interesting point, and that was companies that struggle in the digital maturity journey, they struggle because they can't get the right people to solve problems and do all the stitching for the thousands of executions required behind digital transformation. And so a lot of my early 2020 conversations with customers from enterprise was really about helping them understand the value of solving skills gaps and helping me understand the marriage between technology and human capital in that journey. So we were able to get kind of ahead of that. So as companies were either pursuing machine learning or after COVID e-commerce, say if you were a big apparel brand and didn't want to get, exposed again when retailers went out, that was something I got ahead of. And then this last summer, just as we begin to turn the corner into fall, I started to hear some of the rumblings from some of my friends at Gallup about research around burnout. And in particular, stage 3, stage 4 burnout. That's the no turning back. By December, Spring Hill worked with Gallup poll. They did a landmark study in December 2020, basically showed a 300% increase since 2019 in people feeling burned out at work, knowledge workers, okay? And so I spent a lot of time thinking about load management, borrowing that from the NBA, who borrowed that from the utility industry in the 1960s. And so from a design thinking standpoint, we've been really working with companies on a load management basis to help them understand how to get in front of burnout as opposed to be reactive to it by using virtual talent benches of remote freelancers. So I find that very exciting, not only because it has an impact on human wellness, right? Because burnout's bad for people at an individual level, but for the enterprise, it's really important to business continuity. I give you one factoid because I'm a geek, John. Eagle Hill Consulting did some research around burnout and the likelihood of people to job switch after burnout phases. And they predict that 1 out of 4 people will quit their job post-pandemic and go somewhere else. So I think that there's a strategic imperative. That's something I'm super excited about. The other thing I would just mention very quickly, I've been doing a lot of work recently on moonshot, AKA 10X thinking. And 2021 is very similar to 2009, which was really similar to 2004, which was very similar to 1993. What do they all have in common? Those are ad back seasons. So in an ad back season, it's the dawn of the recovery. This is where all the great leapfrogging happens in history, right? So I think a lot now about, especially big companies, they need to think 10X. They need to get away from 10% because 10X thinking, I believe, is the great unlock for leveraging true hybrid workforces, because it'll force everyone to resource the challenge differently with a sense of urgency instead of trying to, as Astro Teller says, win a game of smarts with the rest of the world.
No, I love that. I love that exponential thinking and the guys at Singularity with their exponential organizations.
Love those guys.
Some really, really, really great stuff. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've been following for a while are kind of trends. And I think one of the things we saw kind of before you guys did it was this kind of up and coming idea that it's not about the talent, it's about solving business problems, right? So and Virtasant, I think, was probably the first player, the guys that broke off from Topcoder, formed Virtasant, decided to build a consulting company, didn't tell anybody they had 5,000, open talent solvers in their community to do that, but really focused on the business problem of converting, people's technology to cloud solutions. And I thought, your move to do that as well, like nobody cares about hiring people care about solutions, right? I want a great website, right? I got to go hire talent to do that. But I thought that move of productizing some of your stuff was a really, really smart move because it takes so much friction out of the system. It's like, I want a great website. I want to find somebody who can do it, but I can't get all the way down and decide what's the difference between these 3 or 4 really brilliant players on the Upwork platform or on any platform for that matter. It's like, just give me a great website, right? Just help me figure that out. And I think that's been so smart.
I think the key to adoption is really the concept of multiple ways to Upwork, right? So as Lars Asbjornsen, the leader of marketing, says, we got platform when you want it, and we've got assistance from real human beings when you need that. So in certain situations, you might go to the project catalog. I need to build a website, get that done. In other situations, you're going to work with the talent services group because you've got frontline managers. They want to pick their own groceries, right? And they want to build a subculture, if you will,
for sure,
of virtual talent. But I think creating a range of ways to work with remote freelancers is the secret to really unlocking the mindset.
No, I totally agree. And I think one of the things that's interesting to me is like, it's not only multiple doors, but it's which door you get in first, right? As we write this
Right.
book for Harvard Business Press, what we've discovered through about 800 pieces of research with NASA is that the first way to do it, we believe, is to start networking your organization inside. Let's get employees to start innovating together, right?
Mhm.
And then you can say, okay, let's have an internal platform to connect employees with contractors, right? This kind of NASA at work. And then thirdly,
Yep.
how do you really innovate in the contingent workforce space, right? Like how do you use platforms and really innovate there? And then maybe next is crowdsourcing. How do you really get those big moonshot 10x ideas that come from, external adjacent thinking? And lastly, then how do you use kind of these co-creation platforms like Chaordix and what they've done with Lego, right? To build communities of customers that can really help you turn on the gas. So this idea of like, don't be scared. You don't have to throw all your intellectual property out to the wind and hope that something comes back, and have that kind of risk management thing. To start internally, start easy, connect people. So it seems like there's some ways to do it. And that's what I love about it is the productization is something that for a lot of companies, it's easier to digest, right? They're not quite there. They're a little scared about what's this whole talent paradigm do for me? What happens to my compliance? What about, what about workers' rights? I don't know what I'm getting here versus I buy a product, you guys figure out how to do it. We drive that. So it's really awesome.
So for
it's
example,
one more thing.
One example, productization, great example here. So, we have situations where a business works directly on the platform, and they might use a project catalog, work directly on the platform, right? But we have others, to your point, that worry about compliance issues. Or maybe they want guaranteed services or a managed services solution. So we productize that. We say, okay, we've got a compliance product now that indemnifies you from classification, guarantees you, the work like an MSP. And there's certain clients that say, yes, I want that. I'll pay a higher take rate for that. And so you have to be very flexible to understand how people work and not have, a one size fits all. Hey, you mentioned you work with NASA. I told you I'm a geek. So I've always loved the idea of like, how do you solve the iron triangle?
Right.
Faster, better, cheaper. And I studied in NASA back in the 90s, the PIC2 project. I'm sure you're familiar with it, right? So the Congress challenged NASA to not be faster, to do more missions and to get more data from the missions and to reduce the cost of the mission. And the secret of the PIC2 project, which cracked the code, they 10x'd all three of those metrics. The secret is for them to reach outside the organization across the lines in a collaborative experiment. So they collaborated internally, then they collaborated with their contractors, and they very smartly collaborated with universities, and they broke the iron triangle. So to your point, NASA's an incredible model in my mind of how to bring collaboration to life from the inside out.
No, I totally agree. I don't know if you know that the Laboratory for Innovation Sciences at Harvard that I'm executive resident as, it started as a NASA tournament lab. And the reason that it started, Jeff Davis at NASA got his budget cut. He ran the health and human services for astronauts, and he got a 75% budget cut in 1 year. And he still had the same number of things he needed to solve. So he went to Kareem Lakhani in 2007 and said, what do I do? And they started running contests, and it started working out really well. And so the Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation actually was born out of the lab being the NASA tournament lab before. So we've done, NASA's done several thousand projects now and lots of success. And we've had the opportunity and the honor of documenting all that stuff over time. But you're totally right. There are possibilities that are just unbelievable. There's some new stuff that just came out last week where George Washington University really examined Steve Rader just told about it. It's not even written up yet, but he told us about it on our Center for the Transformational Work call last week. The setup was that, NASA had 9 robot arms for vehicles to go to Mars. And they spent hundreds of millions of dollars doing that over the last few years, trying to figure that out internally. Sure. They took that, and George Washington University worked with COSI and Steve to say, is open innovation, open talent better, faster, and cheaper? So they took those same briefs, didn't allow the crowd to see the results that had happened, put those briefs out to a crowd. The winners got between $250 and $5,000. They had 3 weeks to do the CAD, the actual designs, and then the CAD drawings. And then George Washington looked at the 17 results in those 9 categories and compared them to which satisfied the briefs better. Was it the NASA designs for hundreds of millions of dollars, or was it the crowd designs? And 8 out of the 9 designs from the crowd beat the NASA designs.
Wow.
So this just happened last week, and Steve was over the moon, really psyched about the results. And
I bet
think more and more
it
of that
kind
stuff.
of kind of proves the old saying that the only thing smarter than any of us is all of us.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. Well, let's dig into the future of work. Where do you see, things happen in the context of the latest disruption? I mean, everybody talks about, you talked about it, like, really the acceleration coming out of COVID. And I totally agree with that. But what else are you seeing? I mean, obviously there's a lot of mental health issues. There's a lot of burnout, as you talked about. And in the corporate world, there's a lot of confusion. Where do I go? What do I do? I can't go back to where I was, and I'm not sure about the future. Like, where are we?
First of all, I think that the last year has socialized the concept that your most closely held beliefs are usually wrong. So much like AWS and everyone who followed them after 2006, really talked about the idea that you don't need to own computers. You don't need to have them on premise. And everybody was like, I don't know. Colin Powell said there's no such thing as the cloud. It's just somebody else's computer. And it was really tepid until the Great Recession.
Right.
And then 2009 and 2010, you had to add back in the cloud. And that's where the tipping point happens. And it kind of destroyed that idea of premise computing. But John, it took 4, 5, 6 years, depending on how you study adoption, for that to happen.
Right.
With respect to remote work, that happened in about 6 weeks, more or less, with certain exceptions, Reed Hastings, Jamie Dimon, and others. But a lot of people realize that the concept of you have to recruit in a local market close to your buildings, you have to be shoulder to shoulder to manage, that was blown up. And then after that, even a more profound change came in leadership. And that was moving from what I call the AAA, managing attendance, attitude, and aptitude, to managing based on outcomes, something that Scrum Masters have been doing for a long time, something that you and I've been doing for a long time, because when you work with freelance or independent talent, you get good at managing outcomes, right? Because that's what you're paying for. So I saw that towards the middle of the year being the true paradigm shift that I think is transformational. As leaders learn to manage based on outcomes, they free themselves from the zip code tyranny of their grandparents, who were locked into this antiquated talent acquisition mental model. And what I'm seeing emerging here in 2021 is the age of talent access. As a matter of fact, I was talking to one of our enterprise clients, TJ McDonald, over at Flexera, a business solution provider, and he is rebranded as the vice president of talent access. And what I think is so critical in that model is that, at that company, they think about talent holistically. So they've got their full-time team members, they've got their independent professionals, and it creates kind of a constellation of problem solvers, right? And you've got one leader looking over the whole thing, working on outcomes, instead of an older model where you say, well, I'm going to have the entire FTE contingent sitting underneath HR, and then I'm going to take everything that is on demand, like contingent workforce, and I'm going to stick them over in procurement and manage it based on price. That was a broken model, and that wasn't about talent access. It was about the siloization of talent acquisition and, if you will, cost management. And I'm seeing new companies with a new vision coming out of this, realizing they can change the way they work based on who they have access to. Remote work makes anything possible, gives you an instant global workforce. That's been a big change. And I think that's not going back in the bottle.
No, I totally agree. I think that you're right on about that. I mean, one of the things that we've been thinking about, Kareem and Jen and I, as we've built this book, is that, if you think about, like, because of our NASA work, you could look at NASA, it's mindset, right? Yeah. You could look at NASA as 17,000 full-time employees, right? That actually are in 8 place-based, facilities around the globe. Or you could say that NASA is 17,000 full-time employees connected with an internal platform called NASA at Work that connects to their contractors. And then has the Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation that actually connects to another 110 million people through 40 platforms. You could say that different mindset, right? The closed mindset of 17,000 people, or the networked mindset of 110 million, 47,000 people ready to do work for you. And I think that's the paradigm shift that people need to think. There was a great piece of research this last week that came out from MIT. I don't know if you've seen it. Workforce Ecosystem by Jeff Schwartz from Deloitte and Liz Altman.
Right.
Really good piece. And I think they got some of it right. I think the idea that organizations need to form ecosystems is good, but I'm kind of feeling like the reality is there's a workforce ecosystem that is beyond any organization, that lives and breathes in the ether, right? There are always people that are kind of doing things on their side and always kind of looking for new opportunities. And we need to have networked organizations that actually have some kind of magnetic pull that allow them to be attractive to that talent in the ecosystem, right?
That's right. And I think,
I
do too. I totally agree. And I did love that piece. And when I looked at it, I thought about like, how do I describe this to people that are already amenable to talent innovation, right? And then how do I describe it to those that feel threatened by talent transformation, right? So let's start with the second cohort, right? So the way that I describe it is very simple. There's a lot of people graduating from college that will never enter the FTE market because they looked at their older brothers and sisters, their parents getting laid off in 2009. It had a huge impact on them at that very impressionable age. And they said, I'm going to have a diversified income portfolio. That's the average MO of the average person that joins Upwork. It's not a side gig. It's not a side hustle. It's a more free and secure lifestyle. We see people that get laid off, especially in areas marketing, creative design, technology, programming. When they get laid off, a heavy percentage of the best, and I mean the most cognitively advanced, never re-enter the FTE market. So it's really simple. I say to some people, you want the best players available, you got to look at the independent professional market because they don't want to work for just one company. They want to work for 3 to 5 companies because it gives them total flexibility. It keeps work super interesting. The millennial mindset, the Generation Z is going to be even more driven by that. So that's the first way I talk about it. Like some of the best talent in the world is just not available to you for acquisition. But to those more amenable to the idea, the way I also talk about it is that when you create a variable cost structure around talent, as they learned in the Research Center for Research Self-Employment, United Kingdom, when you can de-risk innovation projects, having a variable cost structure around talent, you get more swings at the plate. I mean, innovation isn't just about great ideas. I mean, honestly, innovation is a numbers game. And that we were talking about this great book, Experimentation Works. Sometimes this high velocity incremental innovation does create the breakthroughs that change everything, right? So what I say is that what I'm seeing, at least the Upwork enterprise customers, is the most important KPI is project and program velocity. Because if they can resource in a few days what they used to take weeks to resource, you don't run behind on a product release. You actually run ahead of schedule on a process redesign. So for those amenable to the change, I just say that, to quote my favorite podcaster, Professor Scott Galloway, the gangster move in 2021 is variable cost structure. I'd rather be Airbnb than Hilton.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that's a great point of view. And I love that kind of the way you frame that from like fixed cost to variable cost and more flexibility and then more at bats in the innovation space.
And it's a win for the freelancers. That's what they want, right? It's not that we're saying we don't want to hire. They're saying we don't want to be hired.
Exactly.
We want to be contracted.
Yeah, I love that work. I don't know if you've read, I guess Adam Davidson stuff around passion economy, the idea that technology's dropped so much and all these people in the passion economy now that want to pursue their passions because the cost, we can set up in our own home offices with a podcast system that used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce, right? So I think that's a really good point. Let's shift over and talk about organizations. I think one of the things that we see in the overall industry, whether it's at the Center for the Transformational Work at OA, and we've been working on for a long time, is still this adoption, right? There's still a lot of fear from organizations on how do you adopt. And what do you see, like, how are organizations doing it? Obviously there's a lot of momentum around it, but there's still some laggards saying, I'm not going to risk my IP. I've got some compliance issues. one of the things that we see is that HR departments are very much about, taking care of their internal employees, retention, longevity, and really haven't reframed the mindset. So what are you seeing there? How can we as a collective help with the adoption of this new model, right? How can we knock down those barriers and make it more ordinary and boring?
Yeah, I think that rapid experimentation around use cases that solve present challenges is the way to do it. So what I see is if we can connect with people that have strategic programs and immediately increase the velocity they deliver, right? Faster. Or if we can bring more innovation to them by, importing a diversity of perspective that they used to get from cross-functional collaboration, which also had politics, makes a big difference. So what I see is we go into an organization, I worked with an organization last year, they wanted to expand dramatically their languages. They offered their products and their UX and their UI, and it was part of a global expansion move. In the old world, when they tried to hire for that with just the translation model, a plan might take 2 years, but with Upwork, we were able to import localization specialists in market and get them going in a few months. And by the way, at a fraction of what they thought it was going to cost. Well, that opens the door at that organization where they're like, what else can we do? So I think finding the burning use case, really making sure that the product's right, meaning the hiring manager has a good time with the platform. She's finding immediate fits. She's finding it's very easy to source them quickly, et cetera. I think that's good. I think here's the other issue. We have to cross-pollinate innovations from one company to another. So for example, let's talk about technology. There are certain companies that need to really increase data annotation and all kinds of things to feed machine learning, right? Because as Kareem Lakhani, one of my favorite people in the world, says, if you don't have a data pipeline, you're dead. Garbage predictions, garbage automation, right? You know Kareem. And so you got to build that, takes a lot of people. And you worry though, because if you're, annotating data, then, well, that's our data, et cetera. We found one very smart company was using something called data abstractions. Those that do a lot of GitHub know exactly what I'm talking about here. It's arm's length data. And when you figure out data abstractions, then you can scale the use of independent professionals working on your data, setting aside your core IP. And then there's the other, magic sauce we've been cross-pollinating between companies. And that's the idea that on the Upwork platform, there's a lot of project managers that can manage the Upworkers downstream for you, and they do as good or better vetting than your procurement contracting group ever did, or even your talent acquisition ever did. So there's no safety trade-off with the right project manager in place. So again, I think it's really figuring out how other companies that had a moonshot, that had to resource it differently, how they solved that and got over their fears.
I agree.
No different than how Netflix was a 2007 earliest adopter of cloud, which led to them winning the VOD war. I mean, they had a moonshot they were going for, and that was Blockbuster's not going to come back on us. If you remember, Blockbuster went and got Jim Keyes, 06, 07?
Right.
And Jim starts doing all the studio deals and all the broadband deals, and they were going to make the Empire Strikes Back. Netflix made the leap to cloud. Not everybody was like that. A lot of other organizations were slow to adopt cloud, and they had to do it exactly the same way. They had to either borrow from other companies' solutions around security and reliability, or they had to find a use case that was so important, they'd set their fears aside.
Right. I love that. I think that's so smart. Have you read our new HBS Deloitte Pixel case study that Mike Tushman and I finished a couple of months ago?
I have not, but now that you mentioned it, I'm going to read it.
Make sure you read that. So one of the things we did is over 18 months period, we followed Balaji Bandili and Mike, Matt David, who's his boss's boss, are on their journey, right, through Deloitte Pixel. So Deloitte Pixel journey was like so many other innovative things, right? Came out of the innovation hub, got some momentum, some early adopter, partners took a look at it and say, whoa, this is awesome. Became a P&L. And then all of a sudden, Mike and I had an interview with somebody at Deloitte that said, very senior guy that said, I'm not going to support this. We're in the business of selling our people's time. I get ahead because I have lots of people and I sell lots of time, and I'm not going to do this. So there was a point in the journey of Pixel where it had some success, but it was hitting headwinds from very senior people to say, this isn't our business. This is disrupting our core process. And
Right.
I think the brilliant, so we're writing a B case study right now, and the brilliant move that those guys did was they looked around for places that there was a disconnect between when they could onboard somebody and
Mhm.
charge for their time. And they found in data science that it took 4 to 5 months to actually onboard somebody, train them, and get them in place so they could actually charge for a data scientist's time. And
Right.
that wasn't a solution. So Balaji and Matt went to Experify, a platform of 30,000 data scientists, and made a deal. Balaji created a process that he could actually onboard a contingent, an on-demand data scientist in 4 to 5 days, and all of a sudden turn on that revenue spigot to the
Yeah.
partners. And in that one instant, and it got support. So there was a bottom-up movement, lots of learning, lots of moves. And then Matt David, from the top down, actually cut the FTEs for data scientists by 25% and
Right.
said, you've got to use data scientists out of Experify. And that one move exploded on demand or on open talent inside Deloitte to say, okay, they're not going to attack our core business
Right.
and scare so many people. They're going to do something that, hey, I as a partner, I want to recognize my revenue. And if this is going to help me recognize revenue faster and be better for my bonus, be better for my team, this is going to be awesome. And so it's recontextualizing and finding that place in an organization that there's that tension and getting alignment with already the objectives of increasing revenue.
Yeah.
So let's shift over and talk a little bit about development roadmap. You guys have been always on the cutting edge. I mean, forever, right? I mean, Odesk and Elance putting those together, doing all the great stuff, that you've done over time, building such a really wonderful community, all the great work you've done with Microsoft. We were involved in some of that with Open Assembly. But what are you thinking about now? Like, what are you thinking about building? I mean, obviously you can't share everything, but some of the big highlights, like where is the mindset of Upwork on the roadmap?
Well, the first mindset is Upwork continues to build one of the world's best leadership teams in this space. So I just want to call out recently, well, several months ago, but within the last year, we brought on Sam Bright as the Chief Product and Experience Officer. He comes after a lot of experiences culminating in work at eBay, and he has such a vision for how we are going to solve real problems for clients, but at the same time, solve business problems for freelancers because they're business owners too, right? So he's very firmly grounded on both sides. And I think that the way to think about it is multiple ways to Upwork. Let's reduce the friction. Let's create more flexibility on how to bring independent professionals into your work streams. And let's continue to follow data and empathy, which is a big word now inside Upwork, to create better human experiences around using the platform from both sides. The other thing I'd say is that Hayden Brown, our Chief Executive Officer, she has a very balanced view, meaning that we're not just client-centric or we're not just talent-centric. It's a balance. We want to put independent talent at the heart of every business, not just out there in the periphery doing the heavy lifting. So as a result, everything we do in the roadmap has a balanced viewpoint. We're asking on both sides of the table, well, how does this one change in the product roadmap impact the other stakeholder? Because in our mind, if we get the balance right between the talent experience and the client experience, the business grows on its own. So I think that's really anchored a lot of the work we've had. And then there's just this issue of developing new ways to Upwork, like Project Catalog, which we're super excited about, that just makes it browse and buy, but at the same time, continuing to scale our talent services group, which are solution architects that come in and help organizations not only identify exactly what the use cases are, what the sourcing models could be, but to the point of what you just said, how do we create onboarding processes that are bespoke to culture? Because one of the things I've learned in reading the research, Melissa Valentine at Stanford Center of Work talks about this idea. You don't treat freelancers and contractors like second-class citizens, okay? You're not getting the value when you do that. You've got to take the time to develop your own onboarding processes that work just as well as what you do for FTEs. And at Upwork, we're thinking a lot about that too. What can we do to create a solution for organizations so they can rapidly onboard them and they fit? Because I think the difference between, say, a freelance contracting solution and a crowd solution is that oftentimes the freelance and contracting solution, we call them independent professionals, they communicate internally and customer facing. And that's a game changer, John. different than people doing work out there and depositing it. So as a result, we think a lot about the whole product, including things like onboarding, but there's going to be a lot of neat announcements to come. And I would say the one thing that we've all been talking a lot about recently and doing a lot of work on is the idea that companies need to build a virtual talent bench, and that right now it's a land grab.
Right.
I mean, Matthew Mottola, a friend of mine, worked at Microsoft, just published this book, The Human Cloud. He said that the freelancer market in 2025 will be as tight as the FTE market in 1999. What he means is that a lot of really smart companies are out doing big work, not gig work, big work with independent professionals to get them on the virtual talent bench, so that as these great contractors of all types, freelancers, creative to tech, as they get busy later, they choose to work with Microsoft because Microsoft's been developing a relationship with them for the last 3 years. So I think one of the most strategic things a company can do is start to build that virtual talent bench of qualified, independent professionals, develop real relationships with them by giving them more challenging and more long-lasting work. We're leaving the gig economy. I think the gig economy is nothing more than just an early adoption blip on the radar. Right. Yes, there'll still be SMB. Can you design a logo work 5-10 years from now? That's not the business we're going to be in.
Yeah, I love that, man. That's such a good thinking. And I think that's exactly where it needs to be, is kind of more holistic view of the world of, and using empathy at the center, because right now there's a lot of, there needs to be a lot more empathy in the world overall, for sure.
I think so. That's the secret sauce in the age of the age of COVID and beyond.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, so if I gave you a crystal ball, what would the world of work look like in 5 to 10 years?
Hybrid. Hopelessly hybrid. Confused about hybrid. There'll be two tribes. There'll be the people that worry about hybrid workplace, which I find very tactical and very temporary. Not that interesting to me, really.
Yeah,
that's me. I'm speaking not on behalf of Upwork, but me.
Yeah.
And then there's the world of hybrid workforce. Oh, now that's cool. Hybrid workforce is not where we work, but who does the work. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be an innovative space, as one ad agency executive recently said, of concentric circles. Mm-hmm. And I think that the hybrid workforce developments over the next few years will be breathtaking. I also think that as we figure out hybrid workforce, we also solve the problems of displacement as automation begins to sink into a variety of different industries, because the beauty of a hybrid workforce being accepted by companies of all sizes is that it creates more economic opportunities for people who know how to use a phone. I mean, we got people in the Philippines doing data annotation on an Android phone, and they learned it from the ground up to get the work. So I think that as companies move beyond this hybrid workplace, is remote or is it going to be in the office, and they get away from just thinking that small, and they start to think bigger about what does our collective workforce look like in 5 years? How can we make talent transformation the new R&D center of our universe? I think we begin to really solve greater problems than we all thought we could when I look into that. And here's just the last thing. I think that NFTs are a game changer. I think they're gonna be a big deal in enterprise. I think that we're seeing some crazy overpriced use cases like, art and other such things. But NFTs are also going to, I think, along with blockchain, really change the world of business and dramatically lower transactional cost. I think that people of all types will be paid on a highly fractional basis based on the work they actually contributed. I think NFTs make it possible to pay people per line of accepted code instead of their political popularity or their branding of logo stripes. So I just think the world of work is going to get super exciting, but here's the thing, it's going to get very distributed. And I think the companies that think the most in concentric circles and the least in talent is our number one asset, like you own them, I think those concentric circle-minded companies will win market spaces because, quite frankly, they'll be faster, they'll be more innovative, and they'll be able to survive headwinds as they come along much better.
Yeah, light and fast. That's the future, right? Light and fast.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, just as a wrap up, any interesting stories about an organization that figured it out and is living in the future? And one that you've worked with, that you've seen that transformation happen? Because I think that's the key, right? When we think about, you talked about design thinking and human-centered design. And one of the beautiful things I think that came out of IDEO is the idea of storytelling, right? Like we all need inspirational stories that say, wow, if they can do it, I can do it too. It's possible. It's in the realm of possibility, not some esoteric thing that happens at NASA or Deloitte, or these guys are crazy good. I'll never be that good.
Yeah.
So any stories that you can impart with us?
I'll leave you with one here. What sport would you say is the most old school sport? And its trade association would probably be the stodgiest of all. Like, what do you think the most old school sport on TV is? Like old school, probably stodgy, don't really like outsiders.
I'd say bowling. Bowling would be it.
Okay, besides bowling. That's a good one though. But
I don't know, man. Baseball? Maybe?
Okay. Golf.
Yeah. Golf. Yeah, golf's
kind of stodgy, right? Golf's not terribly innovative when you think about it. As a matter of fact, they kill all kinds of innovations. You come up with a new ball, it can take you a decade to get it approved, right?
Right.
I want to tell you a story about the PGA. The PGA. Yeah. Kevin Scott runs their digital team at the PGA, and increasingly they've had to increase their velocity of delivering app-based products and digital solutions and, keep golf relevant, right?
Right.
And Kevin really figured it out a few years ago when he saw, to your point, how rapidly you could onboard technologists to do everything from data analysis to actually building solutions, right? So he began to use more and more of Upwork to the point that he started to have conversations with the leaders in his HR group around, talent acquisition versus talent access. In other words, when we open up a rec to hire an FTE, have we really scoped 40 hours of work, or do we just think we need to hire somebody?
Right.
And so in that partnership, they begin to challenge the rec. And so when a manager said, I really need to hire somebody, they'd ask, well, can we Upwork it instead? And let the billings tell the story, right? And I've looked at this across a lot of accounts. You Upwork it instead of hire it. More often than not, it really was a fractional job to begin with. And as they begin to scale up the use of Upwork, thinking about it now as a way to get work done faster and as a way to be a benefit, this is the cool part, a benefit to the full-time team members who now could do business at the speed of thought, right? They didn't have these headaches of resourcing of 5 to 6 weeks to 2 months to hire somebody. They're getting them in a day or two on Upwork. Everybody was happier. And where it kind of progressed to even last year is that Kevin realized there's been such a cadence of digital production. He wanted to get far ahead of Burnout. He could see it coming, like a lot of forward-thinking leaders did last year. So he basically created a Buy a Buddy program where you could get a $500 gift certificate to go get an Upworker to relieve you on certain elements of a project you were struggling with or working on so that you'd have a chance to recharge. And what I love about it is that Kevin combined design thinking with test and scale in a way to solve a very common problem for digital managers all over the world. And that's the cadence of product releases. But he did it through partnerships. He did it by challenging the status quo. He did it by convincing others to reimagine a world at work where how the work was done became the most important question, not where it was done or whether it was done by FTEs, contractors, vendors, or records, agency of choice. And by having that growth mindset, or what we like to call the winner's mindset, not the survivor's mindset, he's created arguably one of the best places to be a technologist in the world of sports today.
Wow, that's an amazing story. That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Tim, thanks for being on the podcast today. Really, really appreciate it. And just really great to connect with you. I'm surprised we haven't connected before, but looking forward to many further dialogues about all this kind of stuff.
Well, now we're connected, buddy.
Yeah,
we'll be talking all the time.
Look forward to it.
My pleasure.